And now I've heard of something they call the God gene, which, as I haven't looked into it, but I'm guessing that it's basically it's the secular naturalists' attempt, probably one of many, to explain this fact, because it's pretty well undeniable that man is inherently religious. And I think we would agree that in the 21st century, we experienced the attempt at utopia that modern atheism was attempting to move towards, because modern atheism, where do we pin that? Like starting in maybe the 70s and 80s, and then cresting in the 90s through the mid 2010s?
I'd say you had strands of this moving back earlier for the past couple of centuries, but that was kind of the peak when it became a mainstream public presence in kind of Western dialogue, so to speak.
Right, yeah, because obviously, in historical terms, critical scholarship was already naturalistic in the mid-19th century, and rationalism got its modern start at the French Revolution and the Enlightenment, although you could pin it down at the Renaissance, at least in spirit. But no one in the era of the Renaissance was questioning the sort of cultural acceptance of Christian ideas. They were maybe just breaking away from the more institutional form that such things had taken in the church and the culture. And this isn't meant to be a historical poke, by the way. I'm just literally saying that the Renaissance did dovetail with the Reformation to sort of break the unity. I'll just call it the unity that Europe had for maybe half a millennium.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't for another 250 years or so until the beginning of the so-called Enlightenment, which is a pejorative term, so I don't like using it, that you had really a fundamental assault on the traditional belief in Christian foundational ideas.
Sure.
And then that led to things that led to things that led to things that actually probably did culminate, because modern atheism was basically kind of the digitization of this, if that makes sense. At which point it was able to disseminate itself far more widely and have a much more public presence.
Yeah, it was the first time that this became mainstream, because I feel like before the 80s and the 90s, the residual religiosity that America had always had was still present enough that it wouldn't have really been something that could have been popularized, if that makes sense, right? I think that back in the day, people just had this kind of knee-jerk religiosity, or at least reverence for the institutions of the church. And for many reasons, by the 80s and the 90s, that had disappeared to the point where these basic truths that we'd always kind of held as sacred or sub-sacred were up for question, right? And it became a brand. And I definitely remember this period of time as atheism being a brand, and it was a in vogue intellectual movement that I think it is not anymore. I don't think it is what it used to be, because the four horsemen of the apocalypse, the four horsemen of the new atheists, they're kind of has-beens. Not literally, of course, in their field. These are accomplished people, but they're not in the intellectual dialogue like they once were.
Yeah, and not to we'll get to how they view sort of what they helped to have helped rot in the culture, because I don't think they're the only factor that contributed to this by any means, but it was certainly one strand.